Welcome to the podcast that's dedicated to helping business owners to prepare for exit so you can maximize value and exit on your terms. This is the Exit Insights podcast presented by Succession Plus. I'm Daryl Bates-Brownsword, and today I'm talking to Yusuf Ali from Partners And. Welcome, Yusuf, and thanks for joining me on the podcast today. Hey, we've been talking for a bit, so why don't you give me a little bit of insight and background into Partners And? It sounds a little different.
Yeah, sure. And thank you for having me on today, Daryl. So Partners And, we pride ourselves in being the next generation sort of insurance business, but we do much, much more than that. We're very much about consulting and expertise around managing a risk to a business. So our aims as a business really is to stand shoulder to shoulder with our clients, provide advice that really matters and makes a difference to our clients, and ultimately that advice should help shape their future around managing their risk. Okay,
so yeah, most people when they think of managing risk, it's insurance products. Mm-hmm. Is this just code for we're insurance salespeople?
Absolutely not. So we fundamentally believe that the insurance market itself is broken, because a lot of clients, a lot of businesses feel that insurance advisors just sell insurance. And actually we're very, very different to that. And how are we different? Well, we are focused on a very bespoke client journey based on needs. And as I said, we're very much about consulting and about using our expertise to help implement a strategy to manage someone's risk. And even if that risk doesn't exist, we're quite happy to say that risk doesn't exist. So we're happy to say no where needed, but we are very holistic in the way we do things.
Okay, so we're talking exit insights, and we're all about helping business owners understand how they can exit their business, prepare their business, and get it ready so they can exit on their terms. Mm-hmm. Business insurance, it's obviously protecting the value that's already there. And the big one that comes up, I guess, that we're often hearing about is things like key man insurance. Can you give us a bit about that and what are business owners looking for? What are the risks they need to protect against, specifically to maintain and build the value of their business? I guess there's all sorts of things they can protect against, but outside of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, I work on the business protection team at Partners And ultimately, business protection by its very essence is there to help a business protect against the consequence, of course, of a business owner potentially suffering a critical illness or dying. And for many businesses, actually trading under those circumstances are, of course, very, very challenging. In terms of what a business can do and what they can protect, of course, a lot of people know and have heard of key persons cover, but it would be wrong to think that a key person could be someone potentially on a board. A key person to a business could be anyone. So when one's looking at key persons cover, for example, a business needs to ask itself, who in the business is a viable concern? And that could be anybody from the board to somebody that might be, massively important to the likes of computer programming. Some of the other things that the business could protect as well are debts. And debts, of course, are some of the most heaviest liabilities of a business. So a business should be asking, what cover does it have in place to cover a loan as a result of death of a key signatory or a critical illness? And if they're expecting lending from a bank in very tough circumstances, is something like that viable? And lastly, as you quite rightly said, Daryl, this very much is about exit insights. And one of the things that we discuss with businesses is around shareholder protection. So, many businesses really, graft hard for their livelihoods, and businesses should also be asking themselves, who are the shareholders in the business and what happens to those shares as a result of death? And more importantly, have they made a will that makes sure that those shares don't get into the wrong hands at the wrong time with the wrong person? So those are the areas that we discussed. And I think they're very yeah, that quite nicely ties into what you guys do at Succession Plus.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's unpick it a bit and let's just try and make it real, because I'm guessing there's a lot of business owners out there who may not even have some sort of shareholder protection. So what's the risk if the shareholders have, let's hope they've got a shareholders agreement, but they may or may not, but there could be two or more shareholders in a business. And so, well, let's start with the first one. What's the risk that they don't have a shareholders agreement in place if they don't have something in place? And one of those shareholders unfortunately gets hit by the that number 3 bus that is aiming at shareholders all over the place.
Well, I would say firstly, the company's constitutional documents is what I refer to them as, are probably the most important foundations for a business. And when we talk about constitutional documents, yes, having a shareholder agreement in place is vitally important. The risk to a business for not having those constitutional documents in place is for the law to automatically apply to that business and potentially either dissolve it altogether, particularly if you look at partnerships, for example. There's no partnership agreement. The statutory act that covers partnerships means an automatic dissolution upon death. So there's some legal aspects that could really affect a business if there's no agrees in place. And also, when you're working with the likes of business owners that do have shareholdings, do they really want their wife, their partner involved in the business, or would their partner rather the money and enjoy the rest of their life and sail off into the sunset? These are core questions, really important questions that business owners should be asking themselves. And of course, having a really robust succession plan for when they either exit the business or die or suffer a critical illness is vitally important as well.
Okay, so let's imagine we've got a limited company. They don't have a shareholders agreement in place. Partner or own shareholder 1 is married, gets hit by the bus. He unfortunately dies. His wife then, assuming they've got some sort of family protection in place, his assets pass on to his wife. Is that fair to assume?
Yeah, so it's fair to assume, let's say, for example, for argument's sake, we use that example there, provided that the company's constitutional documents are in line with the Companies Act of 2006, the shares get transferred to the estate, potentially by will. Wife owns shares, but the existing director of the business, of course, wants those shares. How is he going to buy those shares if he hasn't got any money or disposable cash in the bank? And equally, a lot of businesses have to ensure that they comply with the 2006 Act around the likes of distributable profits to buy those shares. All these complicated, really, really technical things need to be in place before one can buy shares off of another's estate. And of course, having protection means that the directors can use the funds that are paid out into trust to buy those shares, and the shareholder's wife gets the money and she can get the full value of those shares, and the business secures itself against any unwanted competitors or shares being traded on the market potentially. So everybody wins with a setup like that.
Yeah, well, we can make some assumptions here, can't we? That the wife may or may not have another career in another area of expertise, so she may not want to leave that and enter the business. Shareholder number 2, she may not want the wife of her business partner coming in. There's so many risks and complications. If she's now a single parent, she may feel that the best thing she can do is look after the kids potentially, and the money would be handy. It could be the best thing for her, rather than having these shares that they may or may not pay out some dividends. But it's all about control and loss of control of the business and securing the future of the business moving forward, by the sounds of it.
Well, that's exactly it, Darryl. The stats seem to suggest, if one looks at the L&G State of the Nation report, that's 6th edition, nearly half of businesses actually have no specific arrangement for their shares on death. I mean, that's staggering. And it's definitely something that needs to be discussed. And here at Partners and I'm sure across the industry as well, we're discussing it. We are having these discussions with our clients to hopefully turn that statistic around.
Yeah. So let's imagine they've now got a shareholders agreement in place, and that says what should happen to the shares in the unfortunate event of one thing or another. So now let's imagine that the shareholders agreement is in place. Partner two or shareholder two then needs to figure out, have some sort of mechanism to acquire those shares. And so how do they do that? Is that where the insurance comes into play?
Yeah, so that's where the insurance comes into play from a high level, i.e. Making sure that the funds are available to buy the shares. But what sort of sits under that is, of course, a trust to make sure the funds are not liable to tax, but more importantly, something called a cross-option agreement. And what that actually is it's not the right, but the obligation to force one party to buy the shares and the other to supply them with the cash. If you compare that to something called a buy and sell agreement, where there is an obligation to ensure that one buys the shares and the other transacts the money, then there are underlying tax implications for doing something like that. So for this particular arrangement, it's supported by a trust and an option agreement that means that those shares remain tax efficient, and one can get the shares, one can get the cash without any unintended tax consequences.
Okay. So it sounds like it's not just a simple matter of going down and buying an insurance policy off the shelf. We need to have, I guess, lawyers involved. We need to have, specialist advice around risk management and combining and packaging all those bits together to get a solution that's right for every single business. And I guess, we can say no two are the same, but I'm guessing there's some similarities out there between businesses.
Correct. You can't go at the moment. You can't go and buy it off a price comparison site. But this is very, very, specialist advice. All the professionals, such as the lawyers, the accountants, and ourselves, all get involved. We all muck in, and we make sure it's the right advice for the client. So yes, everybody has their role, and it's very, very important.
Alrighty, so we've talked about untimely exit or unplanned exits of shareholders of the business and getting shareholders agreements in place and protection to cover that. We've talked about key man insurance or key person insurance to protect the right people for various roles that may or may not be shareholders in the business. What are the other big risks that you see that need to be protected in business? One of the things that keeps popping up, we see on the internet is cyber issue and cyber crime. Is that something that can be protected?
Yeah, absolutely. So as part of our structure here at Partners and we have some fantastic specialists that can protect against the likes of cyber risks. So we know that cyber risks is something that keeps on popping up. People are worried about it. They hear a lot in the media around hacking and governmental interference into daily lives, etc., etc. And it's something absolutely can be insured, and it needs to be insured to make sure that a business carries on as a viable concern. Because of course, if a business is hacked and their intellectual property is stolen by the wrong person, then that can have some really serious consequences in terms of the bottom line, and also, as I said, their ideas that have built the business in the first place.
I'm guessing there's never a right person to steal your IP.
It can be anyone. So yeah, I mean, take what you will out of it, but protect it is the most important thing.
Okay, so we've got cyber. What else are you guys seeing? What are the trends of things that risks that I guess are emerging that we may not have considered?
Yeah, actually, I suppose from a business protection perspective, you've got the CBIL loans. So of course, in 2020, the government announced £2.8 billion of lending provided by the Coronavirus Business Loan Interruption Scheme. And those loans vary from sort of £50,000 to £5 million across 60 lenders. Of course, a lot of those are coming up to maturity. So there were no repayments initially or any interest and fees for 12 months. They're actually coming up to maturity. So, businesses really need to ask themselves again, who are these key signatories to the loans? What happens as a result of death or critical illness? How can we pay back these loans if something happens? That's one trend. The other thing we're seeing as well, Daryl, is a number of businesses actually securing investments. And as a result of those investments, the need for key person cover, of course, is a condition of those investments. So a lot of providers have been very constructive with working with us to provide key persons cover for up and coming businesses that want to excel and go through rapid growth. And I would say lastly, of course, due to COVID, a lot of people are feeling very, very vulnerable around the likes of death and critical illness. We know that 138,000 people have died of COVID, and more worryingly, I think 47 charities said that for the first time in decades, cancer could rise, exponentially. So there are many headwinds health-wise, which are getting people to consider cover, both on a death and critical illness basis to help cover their business.
Wow. Okay, so it's sounding like there's wide and varied risks that we need to address and consider, and I guess that every business has its own combination of risks. How do you do this? Do you have some sort of risk profiling tool? Can you assess the business's attitude to risk? I know that financial planners, that when they're working with their clients, they'll do some analysis and go, hey, let's understand your attitude towards investment risk. Is there a similar risk profiling that we can do to assess business owners' attitude to risk? And because I guess they can all have strategic risk, and some business owners will pursue one strategy that another business owner or another business will see as highly risky.
Yeah, good question. Very, very good question. So let's take two scenarios. So you've got the investment world that use attitude to risk tools, and you have various different, we'll call them buckets. So a risk 2 is deemed low risk, and a risk 10 is deemed high risk. And within those buckets, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, you've got a basket of assets that's measured on volatility and risk corridors, and one's capacity for loss and gain as well. Now, for business protection, you can easily say for a small business, if they're a sole proprietor and they're just a one-person business, you can easily say that the risk to the business would be a 10. Because if they were to die, there'd be no business, there'll be no livelihood if they had a family, and that would be it. The problem is, of course, the concentration of risk as you work with more mature businesses becomes harder to be able to put into a tool or a risk bucket. So although we're of course consulting businesses and helping them understand their risk, we're not dictated by a client as to what they see as their core perceived risk. You should always ask and probe and understand what risks actually apply to a client. So, there may be no risk at all, or the initial risk that the client has outlined may not be a risk, but it could be something else. So when we're talking about risk profiling and allocating risk to a client, at the moment in the insured world, it can only be done through what we called a pre-application, which is collating all the evidence, sending it to the provider, and they will give us a rating, which is a number that will increase the premium on the policy. Or we submit the case and then it goes through to an underwriter. They gather all their evidence together and then work out the price of that risk. Now, there is one provider out there, which is Zurich, for example, that have a pre-sales underwriting tool, which I think is the first step towards helping the advised community and those that consult businesses to help articulate their risk. But it's a very, very complicated thing at the moment. And there are many variables that feed into the protection world, that means that risk can either be concentrated depending on the types of business, but you also need to fully understand and fully get to the bottom of what that risks means, what those risks means, and how each of the providers actually deal with that risk.
Okay, so it's a complex set of variables, combinations backwards and forwards. You know, the policy or the insurance companies give you some tools to help assess it. I guess all the brokers out there or consultants have a number of their own tools to help assess risk with clients. I'm guessing from a business owner's perspective, sometimes they can buy an insurance policy to protect them from risk. Sometimes they can self-insure, have some money in the bank and go, look, this is a lower risk for us, you know, but just in case on that low risk, we'll just cover that ourselves. Are there any other ways that businesses can address risk and mitigate?
Definitely. So it's not just all about protection or insurance policies. There are, of course, specialists out there, such as you guys, Daryl, that can help businesses articulate their exit plans and do so in a constructive way that works alongside protection. I think that's so important, particularly when it comes to shareholder protection. You know, having a consultant that can go in there, understand the business, sort it all out for them, and help the business continue as that viable concern is incredibly important. I think the next thing as well is the investment risk out there. So one shouldn't forget, of course, the dangers of profit retention in the business either. So we know that a successful business is one that grows and generates regular profits that are, of course, made in the company, and you know, one that should reinvest in new assets. But actually, the loss of valuable tax relief that a business could potentially lose in inheritance tax terms is also a really important consideration. So there are a number of businesses that are hoarding corporate cash, for example, that could look at something like a corporate investment. Of course, it may come with risk, but it means that they manage their tax position from that perspective in a much more concise way.
Yeah, so we're looking at both sides of the equation here, protecting against potential loss, but also protecting or risk, you know, for gain and investments.
Indeed.
Okay, so there's a whole stack to consider here. What's the future of the industry moving forward, Yusuf? Have you got your globe out, that your crystal ball, that you can provide us some insights of where the industry is headed?
Yeah, I think in terms of the way the industry is heading, I mean, we've learned a lot during the last year. It's been manic. In April 2020, everything stopped. Medicals couldn't be done. Reinsurers were getting, you know, the itch around capacity and insuring lives. And I think we've come out of that. And you've had a lot of the providers, notably the likes of AIG and Aegon, that have done fantastically well in managing a response around midterm alterations and supporting clients around making sure that their policies are affordable. And now we're back to pre-pandemic underwriting rules, and a lot of the providers are now thinking of innovative ways of helping clients, you know, get insured. I think the future of the industry is getting more client-centric. It's more it's responded well to the likes of COVID. And I think if there was another pandemic again, those lessons have been learnt. They know how to respond. And I think as advisors ourselves, consulting businesses, you know, we've learnt very, very quickly how to try and address one's risk quickly, but more importantly, through a very advice-led and very client-centric led model, which means that we engage with clients and ensure that they understand the process. So I think future-wise, it's looking very good. I think we've learned a lot of lessons in the industry from a provider and advice perspective, and I think we are better placed to respond to any future pandemics that may occur in future.
Okay. So I guess I could be filling in some blanks here, but reading between the lines, what I think I heard is that the industry, or at least some players in the industry, are evolving from just selling product to, or, i.e. insurance product, to working with clients to provide advice and put together a bespoke, if you like, package to meet their risk profile as the industry is maturing. And from a business perspective of exit planning and valuation, having the right protection and risk strategy in place provides a potential buyer with some sort of assurance of continuation and predictability should anything happen, especially being covered in terms of cash. So there's a nice protection piece for valuation of a business and business owners, what they want to consider. Have I covered everything there, Yusuf, do you think?
I think you have. I think you've covered absolutely everything. And the last thing I'd like to say, just in looking at the future, Daryl, I saw a LinkedIn article this morning, and almost 7,000 businesses were set up in 2020 by young, savvy self-starters. I think it's fair to say that the SME space, as a result of COVID, is growing. It's growing exponentially. We're seeing a lot of businesses come through, and a lot of businesses need to make sure they engage with the likes of Partners and the general protection community to ensure that they address their vulnerability, but also they speak to Succession Plus as well. A lot of these mature, growing businesses that are coming out of this sort of phase, to ensure that they are fit for future and they know what they're doing and when they're doing it. And that's all I would probably say in conclusion. It's looking buoyant, it's looking good, but don't forget the risks in your business. Without your people, you've got no business. So make sure you protect your people, because if you protect your people, you protect your business.
Beautiful. Well, I normally ask, what's the one thing you want listeners to take away from this episode, Yusuf? But I've got a feeling you covered it quite nicely there and slipped in a sneaky little plug at the same time. So well done. And thanks for joining me today on the Exit Insights podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.